Sustaining change. Levers and leverage. Levers and leverage, what is it? Levers are the elements of a change and its landscape that can be activated in some way to enable or support adoption on a broad scale. Leverage is where a small amount of effort targeted in the right place at the right time can have a big effect on the outcome. Why is it useful to a change manager? Change managers alone cannot identify and deal with every individual's barriers to adopting the change. By identifying and applying the right levers, the change manager kicks off waves of mutually supporting, self-perpetuating activity that are able to create and maintain the required effect on a large number of people over a long period of time. How is it applied? Levers are used to avoid or minimize the harm from forces that might be stopping or inhibiting adoption and encourage the forces that will have a positive effect. Leverage is used to influence individuals sufficiently so that they voluntarily demonstrate and maintain the required new behaviors, where it is often the small things that will have a big effect on the outcome. It is based on systems thinking, seeing organizations as a complex array of interdependent systems that influence each other. There are 3 key types of levers. Emotional levers are those that exert an internal pressure to change, such as guilt, pride, or feeling part of the in-crowd. For example, the warm glow from being praised by your boss, or the peer pressure when you are the last person in your team to adopt a change. To some extent, these levers are always necessary for sustainable change adoption, but in some cases the change cannot succeed unless the people impacted truly believe they need to sustain the new behavior. Procedural levers are those imposed by the process that a person needs to follow. For example, if the salesperson needs to enter the details of their customer's order into the new sales system in order for the customer to receive their goods, then they are unlikely to avoid this step. Structural levers are those that are implicit in the way the organization is controlled, and will exert a force accordingly. For example, the way that elements of the organization are grouped together or managed separately. The message is implicit in the structures about the priorities of elements such as customers, financial management, or technology. Change managers ensure that consequences are in place to encourage the right behavior and to deal decisively with behavior that could undermine the success of the change. They use a combination of carrots, sticks, and burning bridges to reward attempts to change and inflict negative consequences for actions that undermine the change. They keep up the pressure required to get people across the line sustainably. Environmental levers. Levers in the environment are the physical elements of the landscape, such as the office layout or quality of the training rooms. For example, if a change aims to automate a paper-based process, then the physical shelving and storage that was required to accommodate the paper should be removed, as both a symbol of the inevitability of the change and also as a way of burning bridges by preventing people going back to the old paper-based ways. External examples might be the physical location or surroundings within a town or city. For example, if the change aims to encourage more customers to visit a shop, the fact that it is in a centrally located shopping center is a lever that the change manager can exploit. How are they applied? Kurt Lewin told us back in 1947 that a person's behavior is a function of both the person and the environment or situation. He did this via his equation, shown here on the screen. In this equation, B equals behavior. It is a function of the P, person, and the S, situation. Leadership levers. What are they? Leadership levers are anything that influential leaders do or say before, during, and after the change. These may be formal leaders within the hierarchy or informal leaders who influence others without any formal authority. More on this is covered in your handbook in Chapter 1. People look at the way their leaders are reacting to a situation to decide how they themselves will behave, so leadership levers can be swift and powerful when applied in the right way consistently. Actions speak louder than words. Words make up only around 7% of the message, so it is the tone of their voice, body language, and ultimately the actions leaders take that send a much stronger signal about the type of behavior that will be rewarded. More on symbolic actions is covered in your handbook in Chapter 5, 5.5. When a leader says that the change is important, but is then unable to answer any questions about it. You can almost hear the change momentum grinding to a halt. Shine's primary embedding mechanisms used by leaders looks at how leaders spend their time, how they react to problems, how they allocate resources, how they reward or penalize people. It uses conscious/unconscious drivers to perform in a way that preserves an individual status and security, and asks what message should the leaders send to reinforce the change and what is the most powerful way of sending that message. Tip: recruit, train and reward change leadership as part of a strategy to build change capability in the organization. Organizational development levers, also referred to as OD levers. What are they? The OD toolkit is often one of the most powerful that a change manager can access, as it is a well-established part of the organization's control system. OD ensures that the organization is structured and equipped for maximum effectiveness and efficiency. Working closely with the OD and HR team enables leverage of areas such as organization and team structure, performance management processes and standards, reward systems and job design, in order to encourage those impacted to adopt and sustain a change. How are they applied? A key focus will be how current elements of the organization, how people are grouped together, the scope of their role, reporting lines, career paths and performance systems, might inhibit the adoption or sustaining of the change. In parallel, the ideal design of these elements to support the change can be envisaged, enabling negotiation with the relevant functions and leaders to agree a suite of organization changes that deliver as many positive forces as possible. Typical OD levers include job design, role descriptions, organization structure, team structure, performance management systems and standards, levels of adoption and critical mass. Kelman's 3 levels of adoption. Chapter 4 in your handbook addresses the different needs and expectations of various stakeholder groups during change. Once the change is implemented, the change manager focuses on getting each group to the point required to deliver benefits, and keeping them there. Consider the 3 levels of adoption from Herbert Kelman's model outlined in this figure. Compliance, recognizable by a need to simply direct others, with a short-term commitment with low levels of initiative required. Identification, with a recognition of the need for an understanding of the why and the potential consequences of not changing. Length of commitment here is medium-term, levels of initiative required, also medium. Finally, internalization. The need here is for decision-making to be possible, affecting what, why, when and how things are done. This produces a long-term commitment and requires a high level of initiative. Some changes, phases or stakeholders may only need compliance, for example, if the change requires only a simple one-off action, such as updating your new email signature. If your office is relocating to the other side of town, you may need people to identify more strongly with the change. When the change impact is significant, leaders are usually required to reach a level of internalization so that they can be authentic advocates. Why is this useful to a change manager? Not all changes require everyone impacted to fully embrace the change. By having a good understanding of the level and type of commitment required by each group at each phase of the change, the approach can be tailored accordingly, focusing resources and measurement on the areas of greatest need. Tipping point and critical mass. Malcolm Gladwell talks about the tipping point as being the moment of critical mass, the threshold, the boiling point. During planning and transition, the change manager feels the full force of resistance in all its forms. When the groundwork for change adoption has been done, however, there comes a point, a week, a month, or a year after implementation when it starts to feel easier. The change has a momentum of its own and no longer needs specific attention to make it stick, that it is just happening all on its own. Figure 11.11 shown here provides a simplified illustration of the typical relationship between effort and adoption and the point at which they cross and the tipping point occurs. Chris Meyer, 2010, talks about how the concept of critical mass relies on the assumption that behavior is contagious, both good and bad, and gives the definition of critical mass as when the people and systems operating in the new way achieve unstoppable momentum. He also points out that this is the point at which we can safely accelerate the elimination of the old way. Why is it useful to a change manager? Change managers agree the criteria to be used to describe the tipping point of the change, and the point at which it will reach critical mass using objective and subjective targets and measures to track whether the change is on track to deliver the benefits sustainably. How is it applied? In the latter stages of development, the change manager is building up to a point where the change needs to progress under its own steam, and the right conditions need to be in place as soon as possible after implementation for this to happen. This may mean targeting new stakeholders or changing the targets and approach to existing ones. For example, early in the development phase, one of the line managers impacted may just need to help it happen, but in order to sustain the change they need to move to make it happen at implementation. Reinforcing systems. Reinforcing systems, vicious and virtuous cycles. Having introduced the idea of an unstoppable momentum through the concepts of levers, leverage, tipping point and critical mass, how do you make sure that the momentum stays on the right tracks? Knowing when and how to intervene is a critical skill of the change manager. Here we come back to systems thinking again, but this time instead of using it to analyze effects, we use it to create the effects that we need to reinforce the change. This lies at the heart of Senge's thinking in his systems thinking model, page 40 in your handbook, 1C 2.3. To understand how profound change can be nurtured and sustained requires us to understand the many self-reinforcing growth processes that will support and enable change, and the limiting processes that, if not addressed, will stunt or kill it. A self-reinforcing process is a positive feedback loop or virtuous circle. A limiting process is a negative feedback loop or vicious circle. Why is it useful to a change manager? Once again, this relates to the concept of leverage, getting the greatest effect from the least effort. The change manager wants to light the blue touch paper, retire and have every aspect of the change self-drive and self-regulate the embedding process. How is it applied? Change managers work hard to prevent, spot and intervene with vicious cycles and to create virtuous ones. They think through the ripple effects of alternative strategies to find the 2 or 3 interventions that will start the ball rolling. Once the momentum takes hold, they are on the lookout for external elements that will interrupt it. And so, we must ensure that vicious and virtuous cycles are 1. Self-driving mechanisms that have feedback loops. 2. Each iteration of the cycle reinforces the first, keeping it vicious or virtuous. 3. Momentum within the cycle continues until an external interruption. 4. Vicious cycles result from negative experiences, e.g., where a problem results in negative reactions, leading others to question the change. 5. Virtuous cycles result from positive experiences, e.g., an achievement that helps build confidence in the change. 6. Uses systems thinking to identify and set up the right cycles. 7. Prevent, spot and intervene with vicious cycles and create virtuous cycles. Reinforcing systems, vicious and virtuous cycles. Having introduced the idea of an unstoppable momentum through the concepts of levers, leverage, tipping point and critical mass, how do you make sure that the momentum stays on the right tracks? Knowing when and how to intervene is a critical skill of the change manager. Here we come back to systems thinking again, but this time instead of using it to analyze effects, we use it to create the effects that we need to reinforce the change. This lies at the heart of Senge's thinking in his systems thinking model, page 40 in your handbook, 1C 2.3. To understand how profound change can be nurtured and sustained requires us to understand the many self-reinforcing growth processes that will support and enable change, and the limiting processes that, if not addressed, will stunt or kill it. A self-reinforcing process is a positive feedback loop or virtuous circle. A limiting process is a negative feedback loop or vicious circle. Why is it useful to a change manager? Once again, this relates to the concept of leverage, getting the greatest effect from the least effort. The change manager wants to light the blue touch paper, retire and have every aspect of the change self-drive and self-regulate the embedding process. How is it applied? Change managers work hard to prevent, spot and intervene with vicious cycles and to create virtuous ones. They think through the ripple effects of alternative strategies to find the 2 or 3 interventions that will start the ball rolling. Once the momentum takes hold, they are on the lookout for external elements that will interrupt it. And so, we must ensure that vicious and virtuous cycles are 1. Self-driving mechanisms that have feedback loops. 2. Each iteration of the cycle reinforces the first, keeping it vicious or virtuous. 3. Momentum within the cycle continues until an external interruption. 4. Vicious cycles result from negative experiences, e.g., where a problem results in negative reactions, leading others to question the change. 5. Virtuous cycles result from positive experiences, e.g., an achievement that helps build confidence in the change. 6. Uses systems thinking to identify and set up the right cycles. 7. Prevent, spot and intervene with vicious cycles and create virtuous cycles. Reinforcing systems, vicious and virtuous cycles. What is it? Having introduced the idea of an unstoppable momentum through the concepts of levers, leverage, tipping point and critical mass, how do you make sure that the momentum stays on the right tracks? Vicious and virtuous cycles are self-driving mechanisms that have feedback loops. Each iteration of the cycle reinforces the first, keeping it vicious or virtuous. The momentum within the cycle continues until some sort of interruption from outside the cycle. Vicious cycles result from negative experiences, for example, where a problem results in negative reactions, leading others to question the change. It is an ever-increasing cycle of negative reinforcement. Virtuous cycles result from positive experiences, for example, an achievement that helps build confidence in the change. It uses systems thinking to identify and set up the right cycles. Change managers work hard to prevent, spot and intervene with vicious cycles and create virtuous cycles. Knowing when and how to intervene is a critical skill of the change manager. Here we come back to systems thinking, but this time instead of using it to analyze effects, we use it to create the effects that we need to reinforce the change. Examples of vicious and virtuous cycles. The typical change vicious cycle, shown here on the left-hand side, shows how an influential group of people reacting negatively to initial teething problems can send the change spiraling off the rails. As they complain, it leads others to doubt the change and their need to engage with it. When they don't engage with it, it starts to unstick. As it unsticks, it reinforces their perception that there is something wrong with the change. On a more positive note, the figure on the right-hand side shows an example of a virtuous cycle that kicked off when a computer company brought out a new laptop. It was quite different to their other models, and the sales team was not confident about explaining it to the customers in the early days after its launch. This virtuous cycle shows how the situation gained momentum and, through several reinforcing steps, delivered a good outcome for everyone. In this case, it would only take the return of 1 or 2 faulty laptops to interrupt, and potentially reverse, that cycle. Senge and Goodman suggest targeting 3 reinforcing systems simultaneously to create a sustainable impetus for change. 1. Individual personal results. For example, I'll change because it matters to me. Interventions make clear the what's in it for me for each stakeholder group. 2. Networks of committed people. For example, I'll change because it matters to my colleagues. An individual's need to fit in with the tribe can be triggered if we can build a belief that the change matters to their colleagues. 3. Improved business results. For example, I'll change because it works. Ultimately, people want to see that the change has achieved something worthwhile, so the change manager shows how it is having a direct positive effect on the success of the organization. The change manager considers which types of reinforcement strategies will work best for the particular change and nature of stakeholder. Take some time now to think about a change you are familiar with. Create either a vicious or a virtuous cycle to illustrate the positive or negative effects that you observed or experienced.